The day has done all it needs to do. Now only stillness remains. Let your thoughts loosen, like threads unraveling in the dark. What comes next is not to solve or to chase, just a quiet story drifting close. Perhaps it's a voice that remembers you, or a silence that has waited patiently. Let it meet you where you are, and let it lead you gently into rest. The wind howled softly outside the windows of Marrow Lane, a narrow, forgotten road on the edge of a sleepy western town. Lydia stood in the doorway of her new home, a suitcase in one hand and a faint hope in her heart. The house was older than the town itself, some said, with sagging beams and ivy clawing up its weathered walls. It was a steal, the kind of deal that made her wonder why no one else had claimed it. The realtor had been vague, muttering about character and history. But the townsfolk? They just looked away when she mentioned the address. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust. The floorboards creaked under her boots as she explored, her eyes catching on details. A chandelier draped in cobwebs, a staircase spiraling into shadow, and faint carvings on the walls, swirls and symbols she couldn't quite make out. The house felt alive, not in a welcoming way, but as if it were watching her, waiting. In the living room, a stone fireplace dominated the space, and on its mantel sat a single candle, its flame flickering steadily despite the draft. Lydia frowned. She hadn't lit any candles. Curious, she leaned closer. The wax was a deep crimson, unmarred by drips or burns, and the flame didn't waver, even when she huffed a breath at it. She tried again, blowing harder, but the flame danced mockingly, as if amused. Strange, she murmured, brushing it off as a quirk of the old place. She had bigger things to worry about, like unpacking and starting over. Marrow Lane was her escape. After a year of heartbreak and dead-end jobs, Lydia craved a fresh start. This town, with its rolling hills and quiet streets, seemed perfect. The house, though eerie, was hers. She spent the day settling in, hauling boxes and sweeping floors, but the candle never left her mind. By evening, she sat by the fireplace, sipping tea and watching the flame. It was almost hypnotic the way it swayed, casting shadows that seemed to curl and stretch beyond their source. Night fell, and the house grew colder. Lydia climbed the stairs to her bedroom, the candle's glow still visible below like a beacon. She tried to shake the unease creeping up her spine. Old houses made noises, didn't they? The wind, the settling wood, it was nothing. But as she drifted toward sleep, a sound broke the silence. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from the floor above. Her eyes snapped open. The attic. She held her breath, listening. The steps paused, then started again, heavier now, pacing back and forth. Heart pounding, Lydia grabbed a flashlight and crept to the hallway. The staircase to the attic loomed at the far end, shrouded in darkness. She called out, "Hello?" Her voice trembled, unanswered except for the wind's low moan outside. Steeling herself, she climbed the narrow steps. The attic was empty, just dust and shadows, with a single window rattling in its frame. No one was there. No footprints, no signs of life. She laughed nervously, blaming her imagination. But as she turned to leave, a chill ran through her, and she glanced back at the living room below. The candle's flame was brighter now, its light pulsing softly, like a heartbeat. Lydia stared, unable to look away. The shadows it cast seemed to move, not randomly, but with purpose, as if they were watching her. She felt a prickle on her neck, the sense of eyes on her, though she was alone. Or was she? She hurried to bed, pulling the covers tight. The footsteps didn't return, but sleep was slow to come. In her dreams the candle burned, and its light whispered secrets she couldn't yet understand. Lydia woke to sunlight filtering through the cracked shutters of her new bedroom, the memory of last night's footsteps fading like a bad dream. The house on Marrow Lane felt quieter in the morning, almost peaceful, though the air still carried that faint, musty weight. She stretched, trying to shake off the unease, and headed downstairs. The candle on the fireplace mantel still burned, its crimson wax untouched, its flame steady as ever. She stared at it for a moment, half expecting it to flicker out, but it didn't. Shrugging, she turned her attention to unpacking, determined to make the place feel like home. As she explored the house, Lydia found herself drawn to the second floor. The hallway was lined with doors, most leading to empty rooms or closets stuffed with forgotten junk. But one door, heavier than the others, opened to a small study. Inside, an ancient desk sat under a layer of dust, and against the wall stood a tall, ornate mirror. Its frame was carved with roses and vines, beautiful but worn, and the glass was cloudy, as if it hadn't been cleaned in decades. Lydia ran a cloth over it, expecting clarity, but the haze remained. Then, for a fleeting moment, she saw something, a figure in the reflection, standing behind her. She spun around, heart racing, but the room was empty. Turning back to the mirror, she saw only herself, her face pale and wide-eyed. "Get a grip, Lydia," she muttered, blaming the dim light and her overactive imagination. Still, the mirror unsettled her. Its presence felt heavy, like it was more than just glass and wood. She left the study, closing the door firmly behind her. But the mirror seemed to follow her. Later that day, while unpacking in the living room, she glanced up to find it standing in the corner, impossible, since she hadn't moved it. She froze, staring at its foggy surface. This time the figure was clearer. A woman in a flowing white robe, her hair long and dark, her eyes filled with a quiet sorrow. The woman didn't move, didn't speak, but her gaze locked onto Lydia's, piercing through the glass. Lydia blinked, and the figure was gone, leaving only her own reflection. That night, sleep brought no escape. Lydia dreamed of a grand hall, lit by chandeliers and filled with laughter. She wore a white gown, her heart pounding with anticipation. A man stood before her, his face blurred, promising forever. But the scene shifted. Guests whispered, their eyes pitying. The man was gone, and Lydia not Lydia, someone else, was alone, tears streaming down her face as she fled the hall. She woke with a gasp, her cheeks wet, the dream's grief clinging to her like damp cloth. The mirror was in her bedroom now, though she hadn't touched it. It stood by the window, its surface catching the candle's light from downstairs. Lydia's breath hitched as she approached it. The woman in the white robe appeared again, her expression softer this time, almost pleading. Lydia reached out, her fingers brushing the glass, and for a moment she felt a pull, as if she could step into the mirror and become the woman staring back. Her reflection wavered, her own face blending with the stranger's, until she jerked her hand away, heart pounding. She couldn't ignore this anymore. The candle, the mirror, the footsteps, they were connected. Lydia thought of her own past, the family she'd lost touch with, the love that had slipped away. The woman in the mirror felt like an echo of her own pain, but deeper, older. Determined to understand, she resolved to dig into the house's history. The town library might have answers, or maybe the locals, though they seemed reluctant to talk about Marrow Lane. As she prepared for bed, Lydia glanced at the candle downstairs. Its flame was brighter now, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the mirror. She shivered, pulling her blanket tighter. The house was no longer just a house, it was a puzzle, and the woman in the mirror was its heart. Lydia whispered into the dark, "Who are you?" The silence answered, but the candle's light pulsed softly, as if it knew. The morning sun did little to warm the chill that had settled in Lydia's bones. The house on Marrow Lane felt heavier today, as if the air itself carried the weight of secrets. She brewed coffee, her eyes drifting to the candle on the fireplace mantel. Its flame burned as steadily as ever, a quiet defiance against her attempts to understand it. The mirror's strange appearances and the woman in the white robe haunted her thoughts, but Lydia wasn't one to run from a mystery. She needed answers, and the house seemed determined to offer them on its own terms. After breakfast, she decided to explore the attic, hoping to find clues about the house's past. The staircase creaked under her weight, each step echoing in the silence. The attic was a maze of shadows, cluttered with broken furniture, moth-eaten trunks, and cobwebs that clung to her sweater. A single window let in a sliver of light, dust motes dancing in its beam. Lydia scanned the space, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. Near the far wall, half buried under a tarp, she found an old wooden box, its lid carved with the same swirling pattern she'd seen on the walls downstairs. Inside the box was a bundle of paper's letters, yellowed and brittle, tied with a faded ribbon. Her fingers trembled as she untied them, revealing a letter dated 1840. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, the ink smudged in places as if tears had fallen while it was written. It was signed Eleanor. Lydia's breath caught. She sat cross-legged on the dusty floor and began to read. "My heart is a wound that will not heal," the letter began. Eleanor wrote of a man, her betrothed, who had promised her a future, only to abandon her for another. The betrayal had shattered her, leaving her alone in this house, her dreams reduced to ash. "I lit a candle tonight," she wrote, "and prayed it would guard my heart until he returns. May its flame never fade, for if it does, so too will I." Lydia's chest tightened. The candle downstairs, the one that refused to go out, was it Eleanor's? She read on, Eleanor's words painting a vivid picture of loss. The woman's pain felt achingly familiar, stirring memories of Lydia's own fractured family, the calls she hadn't returned, the love she'd let slip away. She wondered if Eleanor had anyone to lean on, or if this house had been her only refuge. The letter ended abruptly, as if Eleanor couldn't bear to write more. Lydia tucked it into her pocket, her mind racing. The woman in the mirror, the candle, the footsteps, they all pointed to Eleanor. Back downstairs, she stood before the fireplace, staring at the candle. Its flame seemed to pulse, brighter than before, as if it knew she'd found the letter. "Eleanor," she whispered, testing the name. The air shifted, growing warmer, and for a moment she thought she heard a sigh. She glanced at the mirror, now inexplicably in the living room again, its foggy surface reflecting the candle's glow. No figure appeared, but the glass seemed to hum, a low, mournful sound that raised the hairs on her arms. That night, as Lydia climbed into bed, the house felt different, less hostile, but more alive. She drifted into an uneasy sleep, only to be jolted awake by a sensation, something tugging at the hem of her nightgown, like fingers brushing the fabric. She sat up, heart pounding, and scanned the room. Nothing. The mirror stood at the foot of her bed, its surface dark, but the candle's light from downstairs cast flickering shadows across the walls. The tugging didn't happen again, but the feeling lingered, as if someone had reached out and then retreated. Lydia clutched the letter in her pocket, her resolve hardening. Eleanor wasn't just a ghost, she was a woman who'd loved and lost, whose pain had somehow bound her to this house. The candle was more than a flame. It was a tether, holding Eleanor's heart in place. Lydia knew she had to keep searching, to uncover the rest of the story. The mirror, the candle, the house, they were all pieces of a puzzle, and she was determined to solve it. As she lay back down, the candle's light seemed to grow, filling the house with a soft, golden glow. It wasn't threatening, not tonight. It was waiting. The morning air in the town was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and fresh-baked bread from the bakery down the street. Lydia walked along Marrow Lane, her boots crunching on the gravel path, the letter from Eleanor tucked safely in her coat pocket. The house's mysteries, its unyielding candle, the wandering mirror, the ghostly tug on her nightgown had left her restless. She needed answers, and the town's library seemed like the best place to start. The people she passed offered polite nods, but their eyes lingered, as if her address was written across her forehead. Marrow Lane wasn't just a street. It was a story no one wanted to tell. The library was a squat brick building at the town's center, its windows fogged with age. Inside, the air smelled of old books and wax polish. Lydia approached the librarian, a wiry man with glasses perched on his nose, and asked about the history of her house. His smile faltered, and he busied himself with a stack of papers. "Not much to tell," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "Old houses, old stories. Best left alone." His evasiveness only fueled her curiosity. She spent hours poring over records, deeds, newspapers, anything tied to Marrow Lane, but found little. The house existed in fragments. A sale in 1835, a vague mention of a tragedy in 1840, and then silence. Frustrated, Lydia stepped outside for air. That's when she noticed an old woman sitting on a bench across the street, her eyes fixed on her. The woman's face was weathered, her shawl wrapped tightly against the breeze. Lydia approached, sensing an opportunity. "Do you know anything about the house on Marrow Lane?" she asked, keeping her tone light. The woman's gaze sharpened, but she didn't look away. "You're the one who bought it," she said, her voice low like she was sharing a secret. "Folks don't talk about that place, but I'll tell you what I know." She leaned closer, her breath visible in the chilly air. "A woman named Eleanor lived there long ago. Loved a man who didn't deserve her. He left her at the altar, ran off with someone else, someone with money. Broke her heart clean in two. After that, Eleanor was never the same. Disappeared one night, no trace. Some say she's still there, tied to that house." Lydia's heart skipped. Tied to it? How? The old woman glanced around as if the trees might be listening. That candle on your mantel, you've seen it, haven't you? Never goes out. It's hers. Lit it to keep her love alive, or so she thought. Don't try to move it, girl. She won't like it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Eleanor's not gone. She's waiting. Lydia thanked her, her mind racing. The candle, Eleanor's letters, the woman in the mirror, it all fit. She hurried home, the old woman's warning echoing in her ears. The house greeted her with its usual creaks and shadows, the candle burning as brightly as ever. She stood before it, half expecting it to flicker in acknowledgement, but it remained steady, its light casting a warm glow across the room. Then she saw it, the mirror now standing in the doorway of her bedroom. It hadn't been there when she left. Her pulse quickened as she approached, the floorboards groaning under her steps. The glass was as foggy as ever, but Eleanor's figure appeared almost instantly, a white-robed silhouette, her eyes brimming with sorrow. The candle's light reflected in the mirror, and for a moment, Lydia swore the flame pulsed in time with her own heartbeat. Eleanor's gaze seemed to soften, not angry but pleading, as if asking for something Lydia didn't yet understand. She backed away, her breath shallow. Fear prickled her skin, but beneath it was something else, empathy. Eleanor wasn't a specter out to haunt her. She was a woman trapped by pain, her heart tethered to a flame that wouldn't die. Lydia thought of her own losses, the ache she'd carried for years. "I'll figure this out," she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to Eleanor or herself. The mirror didn't move, but the candle's light seemed to brighten, as if in agreement. Lydia woke with a start, her heart racing as fragments of a dream clung to her like mist. The house on Marrow Lane was quiet, save for the faint creak of settling wood. Moonlight spilled through her window, casting long shadows across the room. She rubbed her eyes, trying to piece together the images that had haunted her sleep. A grand hall, a white gown, and a man whose face she couldn't see, slipping away into a crowd. The dream wasn't hers, it was Eleanor's. She was sure of it now. The woman in the mirror, the candle that never went out, the letter in the attic, they were all pulling her into Eleanor's story. She swung her legs out of bed and padded downstairs, drawn to the candle on the fireplace mantel. Its flame burned steadily, as always, its crimson wax untouched by time. Lydia stared into the light, feeling its warmth, its quiet insistence. "What do you want me to know?" she whispered. The flame didn't flicker, but the air seemed to hum, a subtle vibration that raised the hairs on her arms. The mirror, now inexplicably in the living room again, caught her eye. Its foggy surface reflected the candle's glow, but Eleanor's figure didn't appear. Not yet. The dreams had grown vivid since she'd found Eleanor's letter. Last night's was the clearest yet. In it, Lydia had stood in Eleanor's place, her hands trembling as she adjusted a veil. The hall was filled with guests, their smiles warm but fleeting. Then came the whispers, the sidelong glances, the moment when she realized her groom was gone. She'd run to the balcony, her gown trailing behind her, only to see him a shadowy figure riding away with another woman at his side. The betrayal had burned, not just in the dream, but in Lydia's chest as she woke, as if Eleanor's pain had seeped into her own. She shook her head, trying to ground herself. The dream wasn't real, but it felt like a memory. She glanced at her hands, half expecting to find traces of the white gown she'd worn in her sleep. Instead, she noticed something else, a faint smudge of lace-like fabric on her sleeve, delicate and unfamiliar. Her breath caught. She brushed at it and it crumbled to dust, leaving only a chill on her skin. The house was blurring the line between dream and reality, and Eleanor was at the center of it. Lydia decided to try something. She carried a chair to the mirror and sat before it, the candle's light casting her reflection in soft gold. "Eleanor," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach, "I know you're here. I want to understand. Show me." The glass remained cloudy, silent, but the air grew heavier, like a held breath. She waited, her eyes locked on her reflection, until a faint outline appeared behind her. Eleanor, in her white robe, her face etched with sorrow. Lydia didn't flinch. "I'm listening," she said. The figure didn't speak, but the mirror seemed to pulse, and Lydia's vision blurred. For a moment, she was back in the dream, Eleanor's dream, standing before a small altar in this very house. A candle burned on the table, its flame identical to the one downstairs. Eleanor's hand shook as she lit it, her voice a whisper. "Let this flame hold my love. Let it burn until he returns." The words carried a weight that pressed against Lydia's chest, a mix of hope and despair. Then the vision faded and she was alone again, staring into the mirror. She stood, her legs unsteady. The candle downstairs was more than a relic. It was Eleanor's vow, her heart poured into a flame that refused to die. Lydia thought of her own past, the love she'd lost, the family she'd drifted from. She'd never lit a candle for them, but she understood the ache of holding on. "I'll help you," she said to the empty room, her voice firm. The mirror didn't respond, but the candle's light flared briefly, warming the air around her. It wasn't an answer, but it was enough. The town was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon as Lydia stepped out of the house on Marrow Lane, the weight of Eleanor's dreams still lingering in her mind. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. She needed a break from the house's heavy silence, from the candle that burned without end, and the mirror that seemed to follow her. A walk through town, she thought, might clear her head. She hadn't expected to run into anyone, least of all a stranger who seemed to know more than he should. His name was Thomas, and she met him outside the general store, where he was leaning against a post, his dark hair falling into eyes that held a quiet intensity. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a jawline shadowed by stubble and a smile that felt both warm and guarded. "You're the new girl at Marrow Lane," he said, his voice low as if testing the words. Lydia nodded, caught off guard by his directness. "Folks don't usually stay long in that house," he added, his gaze flickering to the road behind her, where her home loomed in the distance. "How do you know about it?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Thomas shrugged, but there was a tension in his posture, like he was weighing how much to say. "Old stories," he replied. "That place has a way of holding on to things, people, too. Be careful with the mirror." His words sent a chill down her spine. She hadn't mentioned the mirror, not to anyone. Before she could press him, he tipped his hat and walked off, leaving her with more questions than answers. Back at the house, the candle's flame greeted her, steady and unyielding. Its light cast long shadows across the living room where the mirror now stood, inexplicably moved again. Lydia's pulse quickened as she approached it, the memory of Thomas's warning echoing in her mind. The glass was foggy, as always, but as she stared, Eleanor's figure appeared not alone this time. Beside her stood a man, his features blurred but familiar, his posture rigid with anger. They were arguing, their silent gestures sharp and desperate. The man turned away, and Eleanor reached for him, her face crumpling in pain. Then the vision shifted, and Lydia gasped. The man's face for a fleeting moment looked like Thomas. She stepped back, her breath shallow. It couldn't be. Thomas was just a man from town, not some ghost from Eleanor's past. But the resemblance was uncanny, and his cryptic words about the mirror gnawed at her. Was he connected to the house, to Eleanor? The candle's light flickered, not its usual steady glow, but a restless dance as if stirred by the same unease that gripped her. She thought of the letter, Eleanor's heartbreak, the man who'd betrayed her. Could Thomas be tied to that story, carrying its weight across generations? That night, Lydia lay awake, the house creaking around her. The mirror hadn't moved, but its presence felt heavier, like a door left ajar. She replayed her conversation with Thomas, his warning about the mirror, his knowledge of the house. He hadn't seemed threatening, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, or maybe regret. She wondered if Eleanor's pain was reaching out to her, using the mirror to show her fragments of the past. The dream came again, sharper this time. Eleanor standing in the house, her hands clutching a letter, her voice breaking as she pleaded with a man who wouldn't stay. His silhouette was Thomas's, and Lydia woke with a start, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to make of it, but one thing was clear. Thomas knew more than he was letting on. She resolved to find him again, to ask about the house, the mirror, and why he'd warned her. The candle's light pulsed softly downstairs, its glow spilling into the hallway. It wasn't just Eleanor's heart anymore. It was a beacon, pulling Lydia deeper into a story that wasn't hers, yet felt impossibly close. The house on Marrow Lane seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. Lydia sat at the kitchen table, her coffee growing cold, her thoughts tangled in the threads of Eleanor's story. The candle on the mantel burned as steadily as ever, its flame a constant reminder of the woman whose pain lingered in these walls. Thomas's warning about the mirror and the fleeting vision of a man who looked like him arguing with Eleanor had left Lydia restless. She needed more answers, and the house, it seemed, was ready to offer them. She returned to the attic, where dust motes drifted in the weak sunlight filtering through the window. The wooden box she'd found before still sat in the corner, its carved lid beckoning. Lydia knelt beside it, her fingers brushing the brittle papers inside. Beneath the letter she'd already read was another, its ink faded but legible, dated 1841, a year after the first. Eleanor's handwriting was less elegant this time, the words jagged with emotion. Lydia's heart sank as she began to read. Samuel came back tonight, Eleanor wrote. He stood at my door, his hat in hand, his eyes full of promises he'd broken before. He spoke of regret, of mistakes, but his words were hollow. He left me for her, for wealth, for a life I could never give him. Yet he dared to ask for forgiveness. The letter trembled in Lydia's hands. Samuel, Eleanor's betrothed, the man who'd shattered her heart. The letter went on, describing their argument, Eleanor's refusal to absolve him, and his departure into the night. I will never forgive, she wrote. This house, this candle, they hold my heart, and they will hold my anger too. Lydia's chest tightened. The name Samuel echoed in her mind, and she thought of Thomas, his guarded demeanor, his cryptic knowledge of the house. Could he be connected to Samuel, carrying the weight of his ancestors' betrayal? She tucked the letter into her pocket, her resolve hardening. The mirror, the candle, the dreams, they were all pieces of Eleanor's unfinished story, and Lydia was determined to understand them. That night, the dream came again, more vivid than ever. Lydia was Eleanor, standing in the living room of this very house, her hands clenched as Samuel faced her. His voice was low, pleading, but her anger burned brighter than the candle on the mantel. "You chose her," she spat, her words cutting through the air. "You left me to whispers and shame." Samuel reached for her, but she pulled away, her heart a storm of hurt and fury. The candle's flame flared in the dream, its light casting their shadows like giants on the walls. Lydia woke with a gasp, her pulse racing, the echo of Eleanor's anger still coursing through her. She stumbled downstairs, the candle's glow guiding her. The mirror stood in the hallway now, its foggy surface reflecting the flame's light. As she approached, a crack appeared in the glass, a thin, jagged line that hadn't been there before. Her breath caught. Eleanor's figure emerged, her white robe glowing faintly, her eyes blazing with the same anger Lydia had felt in the dream. The air grew heavy, the candle's flame pulsing wildly, as if feeding on Eleanor's rage. Lydia stepped back, her voice trembling. "I know what he did to you," she whispered. "I'm trying to understand." The figure didn't move, but the mirror's hum grew louder, a mournful note that seemed to vibrate in Lydia's bones. She thought of her own past, the betrayals she'd buried, the anger she'd never fully released. Eleanor's pain was a mirror to her own, but it was deeper, bound to this house by a vow that refused to fade. The candle's light steadied, brighter now, as if urging her to keep searching. Lydia knew she had to find Thomas again. If he was tied to Samuel, he might hold the key to Eleanor's story and to freeing her from the candle's endless flame. The house creaked around her, its shadows softening, as if acknowledging her resolve. The mirror's crack gleamed in the candlelight, a silent promise that the truth was close. The morning was gray, with clouds hanging low over Marrow Lane, casting the house in a muted light. Lydia sat by the window, the weight of Eleanor's second letter heavy in her mind. Samuel's betrayal, his hollow apology, and Eleanor's unyielding anger, it all felt so close, as if the walls themselves were whispering the story. The candle on the mantel burned on, its flame steady but brighter, as if it sensed the pieces of the puzzle coming together. The mirror, now back in the living room, loomed in her peripheral vision, its cracked surface, a quiet warning. Lydia knew she couldn't ignore Thomas any longer. He was part of this, and she needed to know how. She found him at the town's cafe, a small place with creaky floors and the smell of burnt coffee. Thomas sat alone, his hands wrapped around a mug, his eyes distant. Lydia slid into the seat across from him, her voice firm but calm. "You know more about my house than you're saying," she said. "Who are you, really? And why did you warn me about the mirror?" Thomas's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. After a long pause, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "You're right," he said. "I owe you the truth. My family's tied to that house has been for generations. My great-great-grandfather was Samuel, the man who broke Eleanor's heart. He was a fool, chasing money instead of love. He regretted it till the day he died, but by then, Eleanor was gone. The town says she vanished, but my family, we believe she never left. Lydia's breath caught. Samuel's descendant. The resemblance she'd seen in the mirror's vision made sense now. The candle, she said. The old woman in town said it's Eleanor's, that it holds her heart. Thomas nodded, his eyes shadowed. It's more than that. It's her pain, her vow to never let go. That house, it's like a cage for her. The mirror shows you what she felt, what she still feels. My family's carried the guilt ever since. I've avoided that place my whole life, but when I heard someone new moved in, he trailed off, his gaze softening. I didn't want you caught in her story. Lydia felt a pang, not just for Eleanor, but for Thomas, carrying a legacy of shame. There was something else in his eyes, too, a warmth that made her cheeks flush, though she pushed the feeling aside. Eleanor's pain was too raw, too present, for her to think of anything else. I've seen her, she admitted. In the mirror. In my dreams. She's angry, but she's also lost. I want to help her. Thomas leaned forward, his voice low. You can't fix what's broken, Lydia. Not completely. But if you're set on this, be careful. She's not just a ghost, she's a wound that never healed. His concern felt genuine, and for a moment, Lydia wondered what it would be like to lean on him, to share the weight of this house. But Eleanor's story pulled her back. That night, the house felt colder, the candle's light sharper. Lydia stood before the mirror, its crack glinting in the glow. Eleanor appeared almost instantly, her white robe flowing, her eyes fierce with a mix of sorrow and rage. The air thickened and Lydia felt a pressure, as if Eleanor was pushing her to choose between letting go or holding on. I know what he did, Lydia said softly. I know why you're angry, but I'm here now. Let me help. The mirror trembled, its hum rising to a low wail. Eleanor's figure flickered, her expression shifting from anger to something softer, almost pleading. The candle's flames surged, casting wild shadows across the room. Lydia's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. She thought of her own past, the hurt she'd buried, and saw a chance, not just for Eleanor, but for herself. I'll find a way, she promised, her voice steady. The mirror stilled, and Eleanor's figure faded. The candle's light softened, its glow warm again, like a quiet nod. Lydia knew what she had to do, help Eleanor release the pain that bound her to this house. And Thomas, with his guilt and his secrets, might be the key. The house on Marrow Lane felt heavier that morning, as if Eleanor's presence had grown stronger overnight. Lydia woke with a dull ache in her chest, the echo of her promise to help still ringing in her ears. The candle on the mantel burned brighter than ever, its crimson wax untouched, its flame a quiet challenge. The mirror stood in the corner of the living room, its cracked surface catching the light in a way that made the room feel alive, watchful. Thomas's words about Eleanor's pain being a wound that never healed clung to Lydia, urging her to dig deeper. She needed to understand the candle's hold, to find a way to free Eleanor. Lydia spent the day searching the house for more clues. She rifled through drawers, tapped walls for hidden compartments, and returned to the attic, where she found a small, leather-bound journal tucked inside a trunk. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded, but Eleanor's handwriting was unmistakable. The entries were sparse, written in the months after Samuel's betrayal. One passage stood out. "The candle is my vow, my heart's keeper. Only true love can extinguish it, but mine is gone. It will burn forever, as I will wait." Lydia's stomach twisted. A curse not of malice but of grief, binding Eleanor to the house through the candle's endless flame. She sat back, the journal in her lap, piecing it together. The candle wasn't just a symbol. It was a spell woven from Eleanor's despair. To free her, someone had to break it not with force, but with something stronger than pain. True love. The words felt heavy, almost mocking. Lydia thought of her own past, the love she'd lost, the trust she'd struggled to rebuild. Could she find a way to end Eleanor's curse when her own heart was still mending? That evening, she stood before the mirror, the candle's light casting a golden glow across the room. "Eleanor," she said softly, "I know what you did. I know why the candle burns." She took a deep breath, her voice steady. "I want to help you let go." The mirror's surface rippled, and Eleanor appeared, her white robe glowing, her eyes blazing with a mix of sorrow and fury. The crack in the glass widened, a sharp snap echoing through the room. The air grew cold, heavy, as if Eleanor's anger was pressing against Lydia's skin. She tried to blow out the candle, a desperate act to test the journal's words. She leaned close, her breath steady, and blew. The flame didn't even flicker, it flared, bright and defiant, and the room turned icy. The mirror shook, Eleanor's figure growing sharper, her hands pressed against the glass as if trying to break through. Lydia stumbled back, her heart pounding. "I'm sorry," she gasped, realizing her mistake. The candle wasn't ready to be extinguished, not yet. Eleanor's pain was too raw, too alive. The mirror's hum grew louder, a mournful wail that seemed to echo Eleanor's rage. Lydia's thoughts raced. She couldn't force this. The journal had said true love, but what did that mean for a woman whose heart had been shattered? Lydia thought of Thomas, his guilt over Samuel's actions, his quiet concern for her. Could he be part of this, a way to bridge the past and present? Or was it her own heart, her own capacity to forgive, to heal that Eleanor needed? She sat by the fireplace, the candle's light steady again, its warmth returning. Eleanor's figure had faded from the mirror, but the crack remained, a reminder of her unrest. Lydia felt a surge of determination. She couldn't undo Samuel's betrayal, but she could offer Eleanor something understanding, perhaps, or a way to release the vow that bound her. The candle burned on, its flame a quiet promise that the answer was close, waiting for her to find it. The town was alive with the hum of anticipation, its streets adorned with lanterns and garlands for the annual harvest festival. Lydia stepped out of the house on Marrow Lane, grateful for the chance to escape its heavy air. The candle still burned on the mantel, its flame steady but brighter, as if sensing the shift in the world outside. The mirror, now in the hallway again, had been silent since Eleanor's outburst, its cracked surface a quiet reminder of the work left undone. Lydia needed a break, and the festival promised a night of warmth and distraction. She hadn't expected Thomas to find her there, but part of her hoped he would. The town square was aglow with string lights, the air filled with laughter, music, and the scent of roasted apples. Lydia wandered through the crowd, her thoughts drifting between Eleanor's pain and her own resolve to help. She spotted Thomas near a bonfire, his silhouette framed by the flames. He waved her over, his smile softer than usual. "Didn't think you'd come," he said, offering her a cup of cider. Marrow Lane doesn't let go easily. She took the cider, her fingers brushing his. "I needed this," she admitted, gesturing to the festival. "The house? It's a lot." They walked together, weaving through stalls of handmade quilts and jars of honey. Thomas was different tonight, less guarded, his laughter easy as they shared stories of small-town life. For a moment, Lydia felt lighter, the weight of Eleanor's story fading under the glow of the lanterns. But the house wasn't done with her. As they passed the square's center, where a small stage stood, Lydia froze. The mirror was there, impossibly, its ornate frame glinting under the festival lights. No one else seemed to notice it, their eyes sliding past as if it didn't exist. Eleanor appeared in the glass, her white robe stark against the dark, her face etched with tears. Lydia's heart sank. The crowd's noise faded, and all she could hear was a low, mournful hum from the mirror. Thomas followed her gaze, his expression tightening. "You see her, don't you?" he whispered. Lydia nodded, unable to look away. "Why tonight?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Thomas took her arm, guiding her away from the crowd to a quieter corner. "Tonight's special," he said, his tone heavy. "The festival, it's the anniversary of Eleanor's wedding day, or what was supposed to be. Her pain's strongest now. The candle, the mirror, they're tied to it." Lydia's mind raced. The journal's words, true love to extinguish the flame, felt closer than ever, but still out of reach. She thought of Eleanor's tears in the mirror, the anger in her dreams. The festival's joy was a cruel contrast to the sorrow that bound her. "I'm going to try again," Lydia said, her voice firm. "Tonight, when the festival ends, I'll try to put out the candle." Thomas's eyes searched hers, a mix of worry and something deeper, admiration, maybe, or hope. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "I'm tied to this too. Samuel's my blood. If you need me, I'm here." His words warmed her, but she couldn't let herself linger on them. Eleanor's story came first. They rejoined the festival, but the mirror's presence lingered in Lydia's mind. As the night wound down, the crowd thinned, and the lanterns dimmed, she felt a pull back to the house. She said goodbye to Thomas, promising to talk soon, and walked home under a sky full of stars. The candle greeted her, its flame flickering slightly, as if it knew what was coming. The mirror stood in the living room, its crack catching the light. Lydia took a deep breath, steeling herself. Tonight she would face Eleanor's pain head-on, and maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way to set her free. The house on Marrow Lane was cloaked in silence as Lydia returned from the festival, the distant hum of music fading behind her. The night air was cool, but the candle's glow greeted her with a warmth that felt almost alive. Its flame danced on the mantel, casting shadows that seemed to shift with purpose. The mirror stood in the living room, its cracked surface reflecting the light and jagged slivers. Eleanor's presence was stronger tonight, the anniversary of her lost wedding day, and Lydia felt it in the weight of the air, the faint hum that vibrated through the walls. She knew this was the moment to act, to face Eleanor and her pain. Lydia pulled a chair before the mirror, her heart steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. The candle's light pulsed softly, as if urging her forward. She thought of the journal, the curse tied to true love, and her own resolve to help Eleanor find peace. "Eleanor," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I know what happened to you. I know how much it hurt. I'm here to help you let go." The mirror's surface rippled, and Eleanor appeared, her white robe blowing, her eyes fierce with a mix of sorrow and defiance. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropping as Eleanor's figure sharpened. Her hands pressed against the glass, and the crack in the mirror widened with a sharp snap. The room trembled, the floorboards creaking, as if the house itself were reacting. Lydia's breath caught, but she held her ground. "I felt lost too," she said, her voice breaking. "Not like yours, but I know what it's like to hold on to pain. You don't have to stay here, trapped in this." She thought of her own past, the love she'd lost, the family she'd drifted from, and let the ache rise to the surface, a bridge to Eleanor's grief. The mirror shook harder, its hum rising to a wail that echoed in Lydia's chest. Eleanor's figure surged forward, her hands slamming against the glass, the crack spiderwebbing across the surface. For a moment, Lydia feared it would shatter, that Eleanor's anger would swallow the room. She stumbled back, her heart pounding, but she refused to look away. "You're not alone," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I see you. I hear you. Let me help." The shaking stopped. Eleanor's eyes softened, her hands falling from the glass. The wail faded to a low, mournful note, and Lydia felt a shift, like a knot loosening. She thought of Thomas, his guilt over Samuel's betrayal, and wondered if Eleanor had heard her plea. The mirror's crack gleamed in the candlelight, but it didn't spread further. Eleanor's figure lingered, her expression no longer angry but searching, as if listening for something she hadn't heard in years. Lydia stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "You loved him and he hurt you, but you're more than that pain. You don't have to hold on to it anymore." She reached out, her fingers hovering near the glass, not touching it. Eleanor's gaze met hers, and for the first time, Lydia saw something like trust in those sorrowful eyes. The candle's flame flickered, not with anger, but with a gentle pulse, as if echoing Eleanor's softening heart. The room warmed, the air lightening. Lydia sat back, exhausted but hopeful. She hadn't broken the curse, not yet, but she'd reached Eleanor, touched the edge of her pain. The mirror was still, its hum gone, and Eleanor's figure faded slowly, leaving only Lydia's reflection. The candle burned on, its light softer now, like a sigh of relief. Lydia knew she was close. The festival night had opened a door, and she would walk through it, for Eleanor, and for herself. The house on Marrow Lane felt different that morning, as if the air had softened after the confrontation with Eleanor. Lydia woke with a quiet hope, the memory of Eleanor's softening gaze in the mirror lingering like a promise. The candle on the mantel still burned, its flame steady but gentler, its crimson wax untouched by time. The mirror stood in the living room, its cracked surface catching the morning light, the spider web of fractures a testament to the night before. Lydia knew she was close to freeing Eleanor, but the journal's words, "true love to extinguish the flame," still hung heavy. She had to find a way, not just for Eleanor, but for herself. She spent the day reflecting, sitting by the fireplace with a cup of tea, the candle's glow a quiet companion. Eleanor's pain had mirrored her own in ways she hadn't expected. Lydia thought of her past, a love that had faded, not through betrayal but through distance, and a family she'd let slip away in her grief. She'd held on to that hurt, not as a curse but as a shield, keeping her heart safe but also closed. If Eleanor's vow was born of pain, maybe the key to breaking it was letting go, not just for Eleanor, but for Lydia too. That evening she returned to the mirror, the candle's light casting a warm glow across the room. She didn't sit this time. She stood, her hands clasped, her voice steady. "Eleanor," she began, "I've been holding on to things too. Not like you, but enough to know how heavy it is. I lost someone I loved, and I blamed myself. I pushed people away because it hurt less than trying again. But I'm learning to let go, to forgive myself. I think you can too." The mirror's surface rippled, and Eleanor appeared, her white robe soft in the candlelight, her eyes brimming with tears. The crack in the glass gleamed, but it didn't widen. Instead, the fractures seemed to shimmer, as if healing from within. Lydia took a deep breath, letting her own pain rise to the surface. "I forgive him," she said, thinking of her lost love. "And I forgive myself for not being enough." "You don't have to forgive Samuel, Eleanor, but you can let go of the vow that's keeping you here. You're more than your pain." Eleanor's figure trembled, her tears falling silently. The mirror's hum returned, not mournful but soft, like a lullaby. Lydia felt a warmth in her chest, a connection that went beyond words. She closed her eyes, picturing Eleanor as she might have been laughing, hopeful, before the betrayal. "You deserve to rest," she whispered. When she opened her eyes, Eleanor was smiling, a faint, fragile curve that broke Lydia's heart and mended it at once. The mirror pulsed, and the cracks began to close, the glass knitting itself together with a faint glow. The room grew warm, the air light, as if the house itself were exhaling. The candle's flame dimmed, not extinguished but softer, its light no longer a beacon of pain, but a quiet farewell. Lydia felt Eleanor's presence ease, like a weight lifting from her shoulders. She sat on the floor, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness but from relief. She hadn't broken the curse completely. The candle still burned, but she'd cracked its hold, given Eleanor a chance to release her vow. The house was still, the mirror's surface clear, reflecting only the candle's glow. Lydia thought of Thomas, his offer to help, and wondered if he'd feel this shift, too. She knew the final step was coming, but tonight she'd done enough. The candle's light flickered gently, a sign that Eleanor was listening, that hope was taking root in the ashes of her pain. The air in the house on Marrow Lane was lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Lydia woke to a quiet morning, the memory of Eleanor's tearful smile in the mirror, lingering like a soft melody. The candle on the mantel still burned, its flame smaller now, its crimson wax glowing faintly in the dawn light. The mirror stood in the living room, its surface smooth again, the cracks healed as if they'd never been. Last night's connection with Eleanor had shifted something deep within the house, and Lydia felt it in her bones, a sense that the end was near, for both Eleanor's pain and her own. She spent the day preparing, her heart steady with purpose. The journal's words, true love to extinguish the flame, had once seemed impossible, but now they felt within reach. Lydia had offered Eleanor her own release, sharing her pain and forgiveness, and the mirror's healing was proof that it mattered. But the candle still burned, a final tether holding Eleanor to this world. Lydia knew tonight was the night to try again, to finish what she'd started. She thought of Thomas, his quiet support, and wondered if he'd sense the change when it came. As dusk settled, Lydia stood before the candle, its light casting a gentle glow across the room. The mirror reflected the flame, its surface clear and still. She took a deep breath, her hands steady, and spoke softly. "Eleanor, I've seen your heart. I've felt your pain. You don't have to hold on to it anymore. You're free to go, to rest." She closed her eyes, picturing Eleanor as she might have been before the betrayal, a woman full of hope, deserving of peace. "I understand you," she whispered, "and I'm letting go too." She leaned forward and blew gently on the candle. The flame flickered, not with defiance but with a soft waver, as if listening. The mirror hummed, a low, warm note, and Eleanor appeared, her white robe radiant, her face serene. She smiled a true smile, not fragile but full, as if she'd found something she'd lost long ago. The room filled with warmth, the air shimmering like a summer breeze. Lydia's heart swelled, tears pricking her eyes as she felt Eleanor's gratitude, her release. The mirror pulsed once, brightly, and Eleanor's figure began to fade, her smile lingering like a star dissolving into dawn. The candle's flame shrank, its light softening until it was barely a spark. Lydia blew again, her breath steady, and this time the flame held still, as if waiting for permission. "Go," she whispered, and the flame went out, leaving a thin curl of smoke that rose and vanished. The room was quiet, the mirror empty, reflecting only the darkened mantel. Lydia stood in the silence, her chest tight with a mix of relief and sorrow. The house felt different, lighter, as if it had been holding its breath for decades and could finally rest. She touched the candle, its wax cool now, just an ordinary thing. Eleanor was gone, not in anger but in peace, her vow released by Lydia's understanding. She thought of her own past, the forgiveness she'd offered herself, and felt a weight lift she hadn't known she carried. She sat by the fireplace, the darkness soft around her. The house was hers now, not Eleanor's, and for the first time it felt like home. She knew Thomas would want to hear this, to know his family's guilt could finally rest. The mirror stood silent, its role complete, a witness to a story that had finally found its end. The house on Marrow Lane was still, its air no longer heavy with the weight of unspoken grief. Lydia stood in the living room, the mantel bare where the candle had burned for so long. Last night's moment, the flame's final flicker. Eleanor's serene smile felt like a dream, but the quiet warmth of the house grounded her. The mirror stood in the corner, its surface clear, reflecting only the soft morning light. Eleanor was gone, her vow released, and the house felt like it was breathing freely for the first time in decades. Lydia, too, felt lighter, as if her own heart had shed a shadow. She spent the day cleaning, opening windows to let the autumn breeze sweep through. The creaks and whispers of the house were just that, now sounds, not secrets. She thought of Thomas, his connection to Samuel, and the guilt he'd carried. He deserved to know what had happened, to feel the same release she did. She found him at the town's edge, sitting by a low stone wall, his eyes distant but warm when he saw her. "You did it, didn't you?" he said, reading her expression. "The house feels different, lighter." Lydia nodded, sitting beside him. "Eleanor's free," she said softly. "The candle's out. The mirror's just a mirror now." She told him everything, her words to Eleanor, the forgiveness she'd offered, the way the flame had finally surrendered. Thomas listened, his face softening with relief. "My family's carried that story for too long," he said. Thank you, Lydia. For her and for us. There was a warmth in his gaze, a quiet spark that made her heart skip. She felt it too, a connection, tentative but real, born from shared secrets and the strange alchemy of the house. I'm staying, she said, surprising herself. The house is mine now. I want to fix it up, make it my own. Thomas smiled, a slow, genuine curve. I'd like to help, he said, if you'll have me. They walked back to Marrow Lane together, the town's golden light fading into dusk. The house welcomed them, its windows glowing with the promise of new beginnings. Lydia lit a new candle, an ordinary one, its flame small and warm. It wasn't a vow or a curse, just light to fill the room. She and Thomas sat by the fireplace, talking softly, their laughter easing the last of the house's shadows. For the first time, Lydia felt like she was home, not just in the house, but in herself. The town of Marrow Lane began to speak of the house differently in the weeks that followed. Where once it was a place of whispers and averted glances, it became a story of redemption. Lydia worked on the house, sanding floors, painting walls, and planting flowers along the path. The townsfolk noticed, offering smiles and stories of Eleanor not as a ghost, but as a woman who'd loved fiercely, whose kindness had touched them before her heart broke. They spoke of her with warmth, as if her release had freed their memories too. Lydia and Thomas grew closer, their days filled with shared work and quiet moments. He'd bring coffee to the house, and she'd tease him about his family's old secrets, their laughter a bridge between past and present. Lydia felt her own past soften, the ache of lost love and distant family easing with each step she took toward rebuilding. She wrote letters to her family, tentative but hopeful, and felt Eleanor's spirit in the courage it took to send them. The house was no longer a cage, but a home, its walls holding stories of healing rather than pain. If a candle burns tonight, it's only light and only love. Not all spirits seek to frighten. Some just wish to be remembered. If their tale lingered with you, let it rest with your breath. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear a whisper in your dreams, maybe it's just the end of the story.